Davis, Spiral Ridge Permaculture.
I'd like to first give thanks because I think we're sitting down to dinner, and I think a Thanksgiving address would be appropriate. So I would like to give thanks to the people who have helped to put this on, to the people that we don't see that have set up all your glasses and who have set up all your forks and who have prepared your food, and also to the farmers that farm that food, and also to the earth that has provided the food for us. I think that's fairly appropriate in this particular climate. So my talk is permaculture and the hope for the future. I didn't really know what to talk about in this particular talk. I could talk about all kinds of things about soil building and how important soil organisms are for your biology, and how important it is to actually take your shoes off every once in a while like Jeff does all the time, and how important that is for actually our being. Thank you for the light dimming. Wow. So I would like to first start out with a quote by someone that you may know, and if you do not know, I highly suggest you read his work, Wendell Berry. Does anybody here know of Wendell Berry? I'm a big fan of him too. So if we can't afford to take good care of the land that feeds us, we're in an insurmountable mess. That's a really good quote by Wendell Berry, and I would like to start out with just a little bit of introduction about myself. I have a farm in Summertown, Tennessee. It was a clear-cut piece of land. It's a very marginal piece of land, non-agricultural by the USDA, and we so far have proved them wrong. We are actually producing a pretty good amount of food, and we are actually providing all kinds of different types of ecosystem services that permaculture and agroecology and agroforestry actually provide. If you haven't heard of those things, I highly suggest you might look into those. I don't necessarily have enough time to pull your ear tonight on all those subjects, but I'm a farmer, a father of four, off-grid homesteader, and I live a life that's more connected to nature than it is to the production model, but I surely do like producing food. And I'm also doing a lot of research on different types of crops, especially tree crops. I think that the current model of agriculture is based on an annual agricultural system that's not necessarily bad, but it only focuses on a couple of crops. I think that tree crops have a lot of potential as far as providing all of the necessary needs that our current system has, but without all of the ecosystem destruction that it currently provides. Unfortunately, there's a lot of devastation in that part. I would like to just start out as that fact that permaculture is a revolution. It's disguised as kind of farming and gardening, and maybe some of you haven't heard too much about permaculture, and maybe some of you have. Some people think that permaculture is actually a kind of avant-garde farming system, but it's much more than that. And it actually has to do with a lot of social justice issues. It has to do with land reform. It has to do with the care of people far and wide, and refugees, and climate change, and everything that goes on within the context of our current societal reality. farming has become somewhat hip, I have to admit. It's kind of hip to be a farmer now, and that is really a great thing. Does anybody here know a farmer that they buy food from, or anybody at all? Yeah. I want to congratulate those farmers and the people that are buying from those farmers, because in today's marketplace, we see things packaged in pretty packages, but not in a simple box. So buying food from your local CSA or from your local farmers is really a true revolutionary act, believe it or not. Because a lot of those farmers actually care about their water cycles, they care about their soil, they care about the people involved in their programs, maybe interns or apprentices or whatever they might call them, woofers. They care about the land. And I think that's definitely a revolution. I think it's also a revolution that we stand here today at a school, and that we earlier, Jeff was teaching about creating gardens for children. Because honestly, the children are the future of our whole society, as we all know. I mean, how many people here have children? I do. I have 4, and I want them to have something that a legacy. And that legacy is not necessarily a monetary legacy or a material legacy. I want them just to be able to have an earth that can actually provide for them in the future. The Native Americans talked about 7 generations. Those 7 generations being of utmost importance in the thought of every action that we take. When we take an action or we make an action, that we actually consider the 7 generations behind us. I think that the few people that are in here compared to the majority of the people that are out there have that in mind. So I want to acknowledge you and appreciate you in that effort. So permaculture is actually a revolution, and it's just disguised as gardening. We actually care about society, we care about social injustice, we care about how people are being treated, we care about land reform, and we care about the quality of our food and the health of our food. And I think that's also why we're all here, and also why people have been asked to deliver a farm-to-table meal for all of us tonight, which is an excellent kind of stamp of approval for what we're doing. I also think that reconciliation with the earth and with nature is also a very important part of what we need to be doing. We need to actually give thanks more to the earth and to the things that are provided for us. I think if you look through Scripture, you'll find these teachings provided almost in all of the Scriptures. Not just the Christian Scriptures, but also the Muslim Scriptures, the Buddhist Scriptures. Every Scripture that I've ever read actually talks about the importance of the earth and how important it is to reconcile with the earth and how to be connected to the earth. I think that's the importance also of just gardening. You know, farming and gardening is actually the thrill that we get out of that, and the peace that we get out of that is actually a type of reconciliation and healing that we actually all really need. And that includes us in this room and all the people that are out there in the world as well. And I think when we're buying food that's local and it's produced in a very honest way, an ecological way, I think we actually connect to that food, we connect to the farmer, we connect to the earth, we taste the difference. And I think that's, in Europe, that's called terroir, or something like that. I'm not very good at pronouncing French, but it's the taste that we taste in our food that is local. And you know that taste. If you buy food locally, you'll know that taste. If you drink wine that's local, you'll know that taste. So I think that's also a very important part of what we're doing, is reconciliation with the earth. And also, I think that it's a very important part of permaculture is that we need to connect deeply with nature. And I think that in getting our kids out there, getting ourselves out there, and connecting with nature, I saw earlier that there was a booth about connecting kids to nature. And I think that that probably is a pretty good starting point for getting kids to become farmers. By the way, farmers, it says the meek shall inherit the earth. The farmers are the meek, and they will provide always for us because they always, that's what their job is. They're servants. They're servants to the civilians of humanity. So that being said, we can go a little bit further into what is permaculture. I'm sure some of you have heard of permaculture. Permaculture is not just an agricultural system. It is more of a whole systems design approach to how we actually live our lives in societies. It's about honoring the earth. It's about honoring people of all sorts. It's about economies, creating economies that are not just successful, not just that, that make a lot of money, but also that consider others as well in the economic exchange. So it's creative and it's conscious. It's a design process where we can actually design our lives to be harmonious with the earth and with each other. And I think that we can do that in cities, I think we can do that in suburbs, and I think we can do that in rural societies. And we can use permaculture to bridge those gaps that are so dramatically written about. Either the rural people can't stand the cities, or the city people can't stand the rural societies. I think this is divisive, so we need to actually unify. And in unifying, that's how we come together. And I think permaculture has a lot of those approaches and thoughts and systems because they look to nature as a source of inspiration. So the beauty of permaculture is that we actually have a set of ethics that we go by whenever we're considering our approach to how we design our farms, or how we design community gardens, or how we design communities, or how we redesign neighborhoods like suburbs. Suburbs tend to be one of those places that are the armpit of civilization sometimes. But however, that's not actually true. It's a great opportunity is what it is. It's a great opportunity because people are close together. They have fairly large yards that can actually be explored as far as creating resilient communities and also creating community in and of itself. So the first ethic is earth care, and earth care actually definitely belongs to things like gardening, but also things like getting connected to your soil, getting connected to your food. Can anybody else think of things that might be something about earth care as an ethic? Anybody at all? Anybody have something popcorn to say? What's that? Water. Yeah, water. We have to have water. You said water, right? Yeah, so water is very important when it comes to earth care. We have a lot of issues with water nowadays, unfortunately. Actually, most of all the rivers are polluted, and the water that flows through the earth and flows through our ecosystems is important to our health. Very important to our health. Why? We're 70% or 80% water. Most of the microbiology in soil is water, and it needs water. So there's all kinds of different things that are important when it comes to earth care. We also have to consider people care or human care, like taking care of ourselves. Nowadays we have all kinds of different options as far as taking care of ourselves, whether it's yoga or qigong or just simply running, meditation, whatever it might be. But self-care is the first place that we start. And then we can express that compassionately and to the rest of the world, to the rest of our societies, by actually caring for our neighbors, typically in society, we drive into the garage, we go into the door, we go into our house, the whole scenario. What if we recreated that and redesigned that to be more connected to our neighbors, to be more connected to our communities, to be more connected to our food and the farmers that provide our food? So human care is also a very important part of permaculture. Also, the return of the surplus is also a very important part of what we call permaculture. Returning the surplus back into the system. So on my farm, for instance, we create models that create finance, and then we take that finance and then we put it back into the system. We recreate ecological systems and services that will actually help heal the land and help to even people engaging in our landscape. They're healed by just the engagement of the landscape. By walking through the landscape and seeing the flowers, hearing the birds, and knowing that there's actually food growing within this system is actually something that's very important to the permaculture ethics, is taking the finances, taking the surplus, whether that's surplus of food, surplus of money, surplus of inspiration, surplus of the intellect. If we have too much information and we don't share it, it's pollution. If we have too much food and we don't put it back in the system or sell it or give it away, it's pollution. So anything that's in excess is always a pollution that we can actually utilize in a whole systems design. So the return of abundance and the return of actually abundance consciousness, thinking that the world is actually going to supply us with something instead of the fear that it's not. That's an appropriate way to move forward, don't you think? Is to consider that we actually have something to give and that there's an abundance to give. So it's just a switch in the way that we think. It's just a switch in the way that we act. It's just a switch in the way that we provide for our loved ones. And I think that switch in today's world, especially in today's world where we have large amounts of climate change, we have large amounts of problems as far as politics are concerned and social dynamics are concerned, all these different things. I think it's very important that we actually consider how important it is for us to actually get along with one another, even though we might have different religions, different views, different opinions, because it's in the diversity of a garden that the most resilience actually happens. And it's in the diversity of humanity and human beings that actually the most resilience happens as well. I think that's also very important. So I'd like to honor that resilience. I would like to honor all of those different abundances that we have in our life, especially here with our children that are actually creating gardens. Even though they don't even know the significance of it, they'll remember it for a lifetime in some way, shape, or form. So I think that our children and our redesigning of our agricultural ecosystems that include humanity and people, that include the less fortunate people, that include land reform, so that people who might live in areas that are called food deserts might be able to have the opportunities that the rest of us have. I think that those things are a very important part of a justice that is very important for the future of humanity and the hope of humanity. I think that having food grown locally that does not harm the waterways, that does not harm the soil, that does not harm the air, that actually provides a very good income for the farmers that are actually farming the land. And it provides a future generations of income and future generations of successional knowledge I think those are also very important when it comes to reconsidering how we redesign our lives, our lifestyles, our cities, our suburbs, and our rural areas. And how do we work together? The question is how do we work together? How do we help each other? Some people aren't farmers, and that's okay. But we can support farmers. We can support farmers with our incomes. We can support farmers by going and doing some volunteer days. We can support school gardens by helping them, and more school gardens by creating nonprofits and creating things that will actually potentiate and actually create a potential for the systems to actually be put in place. That all of our schools actually start to actually hire farmers. You know, in other parts of the world, California and other areas, they actually hire farmers as a part of their staff to create the food that goes into their lunch, that goes into their breakfast. This happens, and we just don't know it. It's the simple truth, is that we haven't uncovered all of the potential that is out there that's already happening. I only know this because I'm actually in a movement that I have friends that live in California and on the West Coast and in all these progressive areas, which Nashville is now a food city. I remember reading an article that said it was from music city to food city. Do you remember that article? Anybody? I remember it. I think it was actually New York Times who wrote it. So we've created a system where the potential of creating jobs, of creating great food, of creating an economy that is localized and not globalized is actually very, very, very close at hand. So I would like to just say that there are cities out there also that are actually farming rooftops. They're farming, you go to New York City or Chicago, there are actually places that are creating millions and millions of pounds of food. And the youth are involved in this. And they're excited about it. You know why? Because they look at the lifestyle that is happening in the world now, and they don't really want much of a part of it sometimes. Some of them want to do something different. William James was a great philosopher that I studied in college, and he wrote a paper on the beauty of youth and how they want to do something different. And usually what gets them is the military. But if we can get them in our schools to start farming and gardening and get connected to the potential of how that can create solutions, how it can create jobs for them, of how they can actually do something good in the life, then I think that's worthwhile. And I think we should put our money towards that. I think we should put our hearts towards that. I think we should put our hands towards that. And I think we should put our heads towards that. So, a vision of the future is a vision that is definitely possible. A vision of the future is a vision that the cities will actually become food meccas, not deserts. They'll actually become areas of economy that is lasting forever, where we're redesigning how we live. We're redesigning suburbs. We're redesigning everything that we actually ever even thought of. And we have in this room, I know in this room, we have the potential to help. And the help is actually the hope of the future. And we, as elders in our communities, we need to help, because that's where the hope lies. So supporting community gardens, supporting local farmers, supporting everything that you could ever imagine under the sun, as far as chickens in the landscape, as far as mini goats in your landscape. There are areas and cities that have goats that, we just now got chickens legalized, but there are also people having goats legalized. And the potential is very high. So, with that said, I think the children are our future. I know the children are our future. I look at them, and that's all I can think of, especially because I know also that life is precious, it's impermanent, and it's very short. Very short. And I think that every morning, if we can remember that, then the potential for us doing good is actually a lot higher than us forgetting. I want to remember. I want to remember what's in my DNA of what my ancestors used to do, and I know you do too. And I think that's why we're here supporting this actual event and the future of children, and the future of food, and the future of healthy food, and the future of our water, and the future of everything. So, with that said, I would like to end, because I know you all are hungry, and that iced tea looks really good. And I also know that we have a lot of potential in this room. We have a lot of potential to affect others and our families by the choices that we make. So I would like to end one more time with Wendell-Berry. And I know you thought this probably was going to be all about how you can produce the most produce you could ever think of in the smallest amount of space ever. But I think in this time of our lives, we need inspiration and we need hope. And it's the inspiration and hope that moves us forward. It's the inspiration and the hope that starts to ask questions as to how can we be involved. And you can be involved no matter who you are, no matter how young you are, how old you are, how poor you are, how rich you are. We can all be involved in this because it's important. It's important to humanity. It's important to ourselves. Because guess what, y'all? We're going to die. So I want to leave you with that thought. And a quote. The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only hope. Thank you.